Hi everybody, this is Gary, and this time I want to talk about shutter priority mode. And in shutter priority, you set the shutter speed and the camera sets exposure. In other words, shutter priority is still an automatic setting in that you don't have to know about exposure. The camera will set exposure for you, and by that I mean it will set your f-stop setting, your aperture, which is the size of the lens opening, expressed in f-stop numbers, which are pretty bizarre numbers if you don't know anything about them. The good news is you don't have to shoot in shutter priority mode. And it will also set ISO if your camera is set to auto ISO. So it's a very easy mode to shoot in. But I wanted to demonstrate why you would want to shoot in shutter priority mode, and that will be to create motion. We are basically one frame movie makers. We only have one frame, so we have to depict motion somehow, and the way we do that is by motion blur, or on the other side, stop action. So I wanted to show motion blur mostly. So in order to do that, I set up this little scenario. I've got my two good friends, Ken and Barbie, here, and they're going to help me out, and they've helped me out many times in the past, and today they're going to help you out. So I've lit them in such a way that they're being lit by this light. This is my main light, and this is actually a hair light. It probably needs to come back a little bit. So it's basically just, lighting the hair. It's creating a nice room lighting, and the front of them will be a little dark. It's kind of a cool lighting setup. I'm using continuous lights as opposed to flash because I'm using slow shutters. And by slow, I mean like 1/15 of a second. And if you're new to this, 1/15 of a second probably seems really fast to you. But in terms of camera time, it's actually not. It's actually pretty slow. So I've got my camera on that tripod over there. And I should first show you how to set your camera into shutter priority mode. And this is most point. You can do what I'm going to do with a point and shoot, by the way. This is the Canon S90. It also has a shutter priority mode. On the top of the camera, there's a mode dial. DSLRs have them too. And if you're a Canon shooter, you want to set it to TV, which stands for time value. And if you're a Nikon or pretty much every other camera maker, you would set it to S for shutter priority. And that's pretty much all there is to it. That done, you would then turn your shutter wheel, and on Canon cameras that's going to be right behind the shutter button, and on Nikon cameras it's going to be behind, usually it's on the upper right hand rear of the camera body. It's a wheel. Some Nikon cameras have two wheels, one for aperture, one for shutter, and still it's going to be the rear wheel on the upper right hand side. And that's pretty much all you need to do. This allows you to dial in different shutter speeds. So again, if you're new to shutter priority mode, or if you're new to setting shutter speeds in any mode, it can be a little confusing. Those numbers between 1/4 of a second and 1 second, it gets very bizarre. I always suggest looking in your manuals, and you will probably find a page which lists every single shutter speed from the fastest, which for most lower end DSLRs is going to be 1/4000th of a second. Higher end DSLRs will go to 1/8000th of a second, all the way to 30 seconds. And it'll give you a list of every single increment. Alright, but we don't have to deal with that. Basically, I'm going to be shooting at 1/125th of a second. I'm going to take 4 shots. 1/125th, 1/60th, 1/30th, and 1/15th of a second. And you're going to notice that as my shutter gets slower, Ken and Barbie, when the images that I'm shooting flash on the video screen, will be looking gradually sharper. That has nothing to do with the shutter speed. That has to do with the fact that the camera is changing the f-stop, or the aperture, which is the size of the lens opening. The larger the lens opening, the narrower your depth of field front to back. So at a faster shutter, i.e. 1/125th of a second, the camera is going to be opening up the aperture to let in more light. As I slow down the shutter, more light is getting in because the shutter stays open for a longer period of time. The aperture will close down to compensate, and it will make Ken and Barbie look like they're getting sharper, which they are. But it's not because of the shutter speed, it's because of the size of the lens opening. And I want to make that clear because I don't want you to think that changing the shutter speed somehow can increase your depth of field, which is what we're talking about here. It can't. That's not what shutter speed does. All right, enough of this babbling. I'm just going to take the shots and we'll take it from there. I'm going to go with a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, and the camera will set an appropriate f-stop and ISO. So I'm going to look to the viewfinder, and I'm going to let this toy go. By the way, I should point out that this toy here, you see that? This is the moving object, the moving element in the photograph, and it's gradually going to get more and more motion blur as I slow down the shutter. All right, so I'm going to let it go, take the shot. Okay, shutter speed 1/60th of a second. Here we go. And 1/60th, there we go. All right, I'm going to set to 1/30th of a second, take another shot. Okay, one more shot at 1/15th of a second, which is pretty damn slow. Okay, you can see the difference in the 4 shots. The toy was gradually getting blurrier as the shutter slowed down, which is what happens to get motion blur. So if you want to depict motion, use a slow shutter. You have to stabilize the camera, usually slow shutters, and by slow I mean with a 50mm lens, which is what I have on there now, and it's not stabilized, so really about 1/60th of a second is sort of the rule of thumb for a handheld shot. Anything slower than that, you really got to go tripod. So when I'm at 1/30th and 1/15th, a tripod is necessary to take this shot, to keep Ken and Barbie nice and sharp. All right, that's really about it. I mean, there's all kinds of uses for shutter, slow shutter speeds, aperture shutter priority mode. Trains are a good candidate. You know, you set your camera on a tripod, wait for a train to go by. Can be a cool shot. Anything where you want to depict motion, sporting events where you want to depict motion, your subjects will be blurry. Don't get me wrong here. It's a blurry shot. Anything that moves will be blurry with slow shutter speeds, but sometimes that can be a cool look for your action shots. All right, and the other side of the coin, of course, would be freeze frame, and quite frankly, you just do the opposite. You dial in fast shutter speeds. I would say 1/500th of a second minimum for fast shutter speeds, and I have to tell you, if you're going to do stop action shots, then you really need to have a lot of light, because you're closing down the shutter, making it so fast, there's only a very short amount of time light gets in your camera, and chances are, especially if you use the kit lens that came with your camera and you're shooting at 55mm, your camera will only be able to open up to about f5.6, and that isn't nearly enough. Now, most of today's cameras have very high ISO settings, so hopefully your camera will automatically raise up your ISO to allow you to shoot faster. But that's a discussion for another day. That's all I have for now. Thanks, guys.